I would say the first thing, Jazakallah khair, understand what your religion is. So as a parent, guide your youth or your children to what Islam is. The most fundamental problem, we as a Muslim Ummah, we have lots of problems. One of the challenges is to understand what is Islam. What is the nature of Islam? Okay, so if somebody watches YouTube and he finds a Muslim debating someone and he likes the fact that he debates well and does that, no problem. That can be someone you're aspiring to be like that, no problem. Okay, but I want to build a holistic personality, so I take that trait and say, okay, that's good. Now let's build around it, right? That requires thinking. That requires, that's not something I can sit and say it's 1, 2, 3. But what I can say, that means build the foundation of that person to understand what it means to be a Muslim. Connect him to the Quran and the Sunnah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to understand the basic elements of his religion and then build on top of it. Okay? If you take that as a premise, right, then you build someone. What does it mean? What does it look like? Is a child who says, I want to live for Islam. Living for Islam means I don't care what I do in my life, but the most important thing is my religion. And where my religion sits in the context of the whole world. You know, that worldview, right? Is to expand their horizons beyond the limitation of the narrowness that they live in. And that's what Islam does. When you sit here and see what's happening in Palestine, and you're a Muslim and they're a Muslim, how can you not think about what is happening in that country? Doesn't that trigger, why is it happening? How did it happen? Why is it that there are billions of Muslims around there and nothing's happening? And this small entity, right, can sit there and do what it's doing. That sparks thinking. Naturally, every human being has realities that does that. That process then has to be refined. Someone has to put that thinking in its rightful place. That's where the parents come in. That's where the people in your community come in. Okay, you want to understand what's happening? Let's open this discussion wider. That expands the horizon, it makes you think a little bit more. Then you start to connect that back to what it means to be a Muslim, right? And then you connect that back to the heroes of Islam. 1450 years of Islamic history. So find the examples to make them aspire to those personalities. Okay, so that's the framework of thinking. The dots you have to fill in. It's a difficult question. Jazakallah khair. Generally, you know, youth, not just Muslim youth, just generally, because we live in a society, right? So our youth are not immune, they're not in a ghetto, they're not in a cocoon. So whatever affects youth generally affects our youth as well. So if you look at playing with phones, playing with games, right? Okay, their concentration span, wanting instant results in anything they do, right? These are kind of things, okay, that in every generation, every era, there is elements, you know, of this. You know, when I was researching this topic, I came across an article, and the author of the article gave 3-4 quotes that go all the way back to the Greeks about what generations thought of their youth of their time. And they said something very similar to what you said. So every generation feels like that about their youth, right? So our youth are experiencing very similar things, right? So there is a generational thing. Secondly, the attack on Islam over the last 25, 30 years, let's say 20, for them, let's say last 15 years, from 2010 onwards, right? If you see them, they're born in 2000, by the time 2010, they're 10 years old, they can understand things. To 15 years later, to where we are today, what they've seen, okay, and the environment that's being created, coupled with the fact that, you know, they have a different way of learning, different way of studying, different way of moving forward, and the things that they aspire to, all of that plays into, you know, this problem. As communities, we have to ask a question, and I mean every Muslim community, I don't mean you guys here in King's Cross, right? Every community has to ask, what have we done to open up, you know, for the youth? What have we done for them? What facilities? When I say facilities, mashallah, you know, you got all of these things. Things like masjids. What do you build in youth when they go to the masjid? What do parents build in their youth at home? Right? All of that has to be looked at. Right? So it may seem like that things are slower, okay, and things perhaps not the way that they were in our time, but then there is a whole generation which has got activated by the events in Palestine. So we can't not consider that, and how do you use what their emotions and what their feelings are towards what they're seeing to develop another generation who understands the real cause of that problem, or like that any other problem. So it's a difficult one in terms of, is there a magic answer to this question? Can we resolve it? It takes all of the community to be involved in order to push our youth in that direction, right? And then create a generation that then create a generation within their age groups, right? Very difficult for a guy who looks like me, to go to youth, and start mingling. Not that we can't have a conversation, of course we can, but it's a lot easier when people of that generation are interacting with their own generation. The thinking is, how do you build that? I don't know if that answers your question, right? I don't know, but it's not. It doesn't have a simple answer. But I think Palestine's activated a lot of things. I know what you're saying. You're saying aside from Palestine, I think it's awoken a lot of people, right? I've seen a lot of these protests, which are whatever the banner they're protesting under. Leave that to one side, right? But the fact that they're going out there, the fact they're in the streets, the fact that they know that there could be consequences, they don't care. That's the unique thing about youth, right? Some of them are just fearless, committed, can get up and go. And then if you step back and look at, we were talking previously about, the number of kids that go over, overseas to study, learn their religion, and learn it better than probably, in our time, right? That pool of people is also expanding. All you got to do is capture it and then develop the Islamic framework around what they learn. Unfortunately, they learn in isolation like this. What we have the ability as elders or communities is to build the frameworks by which they can look at their religion. When we talk about this issue of establishing Islam, or establishing a Khilafah, a lot of people, they put principles that have nothing to do with our religion, quite frankly speaking. They start, and this is one example, when this happens and this happens, like it's an equation, right? Like we don't have a seerah, like we don't have the life of the Prophet ﷺ, and we don't have the reality of how change is created. None of this, in most cases, I don't say every case, in most cases, none of this they studied. They didn't study any of this. And they started to create formulas, which really you think, I don't understand what it is you're trying to say. Their point is that if Muslims were really committed to Islam, then they would come and they would pray all their prayers in a masjid. That's what they're trying to say. Even if that were true, let's assume that happened, you still are not going to achieve Khilafah. Why? Because to achieve Khilafah, there are particular things you have to understand and particular things you have to do. Right? And that's a particular type of study that you have to have. The salah will bring you closer and strengthen you, of course, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And all of these things which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us, not just the salah. You can say fasting, then the optional fasting. You can talk about the sadaqah and you can talk about the zakah and so on and so forth. Well, when does it stop? Where is this metric where you keep filling this pot and it hits a point and now everything's okay? So the point is, these things, the ummah will always go up and down. It'll fluctuate. Sometimes there'll be more people, less people. It has no relationship to the subject of establishing Islam as a deen. That has particular steps. If you do all of those activities, which are good by the way, and you don't do these, you still ain't going to have a Khilafah. You can say there's 1 million people in here praying, 1 million people praying every salah, you're not going to have a state. Why? Because that's a particular study, a particular set of steps, and a particular way to get to that point. So you have to join all of these things and put them in the right place. You need to have knowledge, you need to have strategy, you need to have work, this is very particular, right? Praying has its place, this has its place. What's the relationship between the one who works for this and prays is to strengthen his relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and being deserving of his subhanahu wa ta'ala's victory. All of the good deeds, they come together to push you in that direction. But if you did that but you didn't understand this topic, you're not going to achieve a state. Why? Because you'll do so much of that and you won't do the actions which are required to establish Islam. And in most cases, the ones who say this, they themselves do nothing for this, but they do a lot of this, but they do nothing for this. Right? And they think magically, like an equation, that life is like that. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the dunya, He created it in a sunnah, a way. He doesn't change that except for the anbiya, for the miracles and maybe some instance of karama. Okay? But generally speaking, the rules of the dunya change, and what you have to do and the effort you have to make is same for everybody, whether Muslim or even the non-Muslims. So you have to understand everything and put it in its rightful place. This equationing and this kind of stuff, it doesn't carry any merit or weight. And they may intend good, but intending good and wanting to achieve something else is two different things. The Prophet mentioned a hadith, to paraphrase. He said there'll come a day when nobody will not be touched by riba, because the world functions. You see, when we look at Muslim, first thing you have to look at before you look at Muslim is human being. What affects a human being? How does a human being think? What affects them? What influences them? All of those things are things you have to look at. When you become a Muslim, or you're born a Muslim, you're not different to a human being. You're not like any human being. You still, the same things that affect another human being affect you as a Muslim or a non-Muslim, right? Everything is the same. So what does Islam do, right? When you embrace Islam, you then say, look, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I've understood that He's my Rabb, He's the one who created me. I understand that He has sent me guidance. I understand the purpose of life, what will happen when I die, and therefore I'm going to commit myself to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. That's the only thing. You have a framework which you're convinced of, and now you're following. And that goal is not just this life, but also the next life, right? Because if you think about it, as a human being, imagine me, right? I can fill this with any drink right now, an alcoholic drink, and drink it. What's stopping me? Nothing. Right? I can take a drink, and alcoholic, and put it in here and drink it. What's stopping me? I'm a Muslim, I can't do that. Not because I can't do it, because I'm convinced that that's the wrong thing to do. Right? So that's my framework. Somebody else's framework, he may not understand that. He may be a Muslim. He may say, look, I'm a Muslim, I know, but I need money. That money could be either a need or just greed. Either he needs it, right, and he thinks I can't get it unless I do this, or he wants to have what the society is telling you makes you successful and cool. Right? Why do people follow Andrew Tate? Why? Even there are Muslim duat, who I saw one of them, I don't want to mention names, yeah? And when I heard him talking, and I saw the lifestyle that he's promoting, I thought this guy is just influenced by, like a Andrew Tate, that type of character, and he's telling youth that this is your aspiration. I can lace it with Islam as I want, right? But I'm still telling you on a Lamborghini, you want these things and that kind of stuff. So if you think that's a cool thing to have, and selling drugs will get you there, and you don't have an Islamic framework, what are you going to do? Especially when everyone's telling you this is the right, cool thing to do. That's how human beings get influenced. Right? That's why most of us, if you step back and look at most of us, we do everything pretty much the same. If you look at the way we're all dressed, none of us in this room are dressed very different to anybody else. True or not? Right? We are very similar. Everyone's got kind of like a jeans on, kind of like a trainer thing happening. We're very similar. Why? It's not because we're all the same. We sat in the house and said, what are you going to wear? Yeah? And let's look at it similar. Because we're influenced by the same environment. So when that environment is corrupt, when the things that influence you are all the bad things, what are most people going to do? When their role models are movie stars, right? And they're telling you to have luxury things, to have big houses, to smoke these type of things, to have this type of person on your arm, so on and so forth. What do you think most people are going to aspire to? They're going to aspire to something like that, right? So when that society is bad and the influences are bad, everyone gets colored by it. You can't get away from it. It's a magic effect. right? It's only when you take Islam, it's like putting your shield on, as a Muslim understanding of that, you have something different. So if, as long as corruption dominates, most people, including Muslim, will be influenced by it. That's why I said, if you want to be great, you've got to be outside of that, right? Because everybody else does that. Everyone else does the same thing. As a Muslim, you want to be unique and different. And that's what makes you special. And that's why you need to study your religion. And you're right, this is true. People have this concept of, keeping up with the Jones. Everybody know that term? You youngsters, you guys know that term, right? He has it, I need to have it. And there are parents, they're like that. Their kids will come home, okay? Not everything is parents, right? But you have to be honest, there are cases like that. If your son comes home and he's driving a 20, 30,000 car, right? 20, 30K car, right? And your son can't even put a sentence together. You would ask, where did you get that car from? But if I can drive you around in that nice car and everyone says, oh, wow, such and such a son's got a really nice car. Okay, and that makes you feel good. Easy to turn a blind eye. Okay, if a son goes home and says to his mum, here, have some jewelry. Okay, easy to turn a blind eye. Let's make the house nice. Easy to turn a blind eye. And that's where, because the society defines these things as success, most people will chase those things. Because like I said, human beings are human beings. So, and riba is no different. It's the same. It's just a means to an easy end. For an individual, okay, take a loan, I can buy a house. Otherwise, I've got to think about 101 different things of how to do that. So it's an unfortunate situation, but it's because of the environment we live in, it affects most people.